Hey guys, Ron here, and before I begin, you must know that I'm about to review one of the most divisive Pokemon games ever. Not among Pokemon fans, but among people. I believe the difference in opinion stems from each player having a completely different reason for playing Pokemon games, a very different perspective when it comes to what Pokemon games should be, and their relationship with the most recent Pokemon games in general. You have those who play Pokemon because it's one of the many video games that they enjoy, or used to enjoy. Pokemon may not be in their top 10 favorite franchises, so they very much will compare the games to other games, and if they are not graphically or mechanically up to the high budget standards of those other games that they enjoy more, it makes sense that the flaws will be glaring to them. Then you have those like my friends and siblings and many of you guys watching who play Pokemon because they like Pokemon and may play many other video games but aren't necessarily comparing them to other games because what they get out of Pokemon is completely different. These aren't people who are lowering their standards. They very much love all the critically acclaimed games that have come out this year but play Pokemon because they like raising a team of Pokemon, battling, running around and enjoying their time. They are definitely not shills, they just play Pokemon because they like Pokemon. Then you have people like me who don't play other games and shouldn't be expected to play other video games in order to enjoy a casual children's game like Pokemon. So there is no world in which I would compare Pokemon to other games because I simply don't have that perspective. I have other hobbies that I put my time and money into, and I play Pokemon not because it's a video game, but because I'm a huge fan of the Pokemon themselves, the franchise, and the various Pokemon related media that comes out. So when a game like Legends EA is released and gives me the opportunity to play the exact way I want to play Pokemon, there is no reason for me to be disappointed. All the flaws in the game are objective, but they don't impede my ability to play in the way I prioritize playing. If you prioritize graphics because it can ruin your immersion, then that is totally valid, but every person playing has different priorities. If this game does not deliver on what you paid for, you should be annoyed, it makes sense. But fans like me should also be annoyed when those who don't enjoy the games do not understand our perspective and berate us for liking the game. This review isn't a recommendation for those who are on the fence. This is simply my account of everything I experienced playing these games. It's the literal reality. It's not me telling you what you should feel, but rather describing how I felt. There were things I loved and there were things I disliked. I have not been paid to disguise my true thoughts. I shouldn't even have to say that. I genuinely think a very off-putting trait a person can have is constantly thinking that people who don't share their same opinion as them are being disingenuous or lying. And even worse is the thought that a person has to have a negative opinion about something in order to be truly honest. So yes, despite this being a fairly positive critique, this is still an honest review. If you don't believe me, don't watch the video. You know, why spend your time listening to the words of someone you don't trust? But before beginning, I do want to talk about today's sponsor, Gentle Bands. Unless we're talking about mega rings, I was far from the type of person to wear some jewelry, and would rarely put a ring on my finger. But Gentle Band's stunning selection of truly unique and impressive bands and rings has changed everything. When Gentle Bands asked me which rings I wanted to test out, it was a seriously hard choice, because they have so many cool rings that I wanted to get, and almost all of them are my exact style. It took me an hour to narrow it down. I just wanted them all. Last time they sponsored us, I got the Marvelous Chateau, but this time, you know, your boy copped the Phantom and the Motto, both one of a kind since they have their own unique serial number. I'm gonna wear this awesome tungsten Phantom whenever I go out with my Rayquaza jacket, and the Motto with its meteorite and dinosaur bone makes sense with more formal attire. I mean, check out that craftsmanship and polish. Dang, the weekend after I unboxed these bad boys from their super cool packaging, I took them to a Halloween party that I was nervously anticipating, but because of how cool I felt with a Gentle Bands ring on my finger, my confidence levels were through the roof. What's great is that on top of free engravings, they also offer these choices of stylish chains to come with your ring, so that you can instantly turn them into a necklace at times where a ring is inconvenient. What Gentle Bands calls a pain point, like at the gym, for example. And with code TRUEGREEN, using the link in the top of the description, you'll get an extra 25% off your purchase just in time for their Black Friday sale. Each ring is a piece of art, so even if you're hesitant, just check out their website to look at the hundreds of styles they have. It's truly fun to explore their plethora of designs. Let's start the review with the battle against Laban. Just kidding. We're gonna start at the beginning. Before moving on to the plot and gameplay, I want to describe my initial impression of the first few minutes of the game as I honed in on the visual presentation, the soundtrack, and performance. Right as you exit the train, it is immediately noticeable how much better this looks compared to Scarlet and Violet. Way better art direction, textures, and anti-aliasing, and of course the performance was leagues better, and any pop-in was basically unnoticeable to me, so I immediately felt at ease because I didn't have to worry about the most major flaws of the previous Pokemon games. There is a bunch of detail here for hard hardcore fans too, like posters and advertisements. This very much feels like the Pokemon world to me, and as a hardcore fan, I can't help but be entertained. I know this is subpar graphics for a gamer, but for someone who only has Pokemon games to compare this to, it very much is the best looking 3D Pokemon game in my opinion, and I love how Sword and Shield looks. I'm a personal fan of the Holocaster UI that this game implements. It does help make this game feel like the future of Pokemon, and contrasts with Legend Arceus' traditional style. Obviously, it could be implemented more completely, but when it comes to the UI, like the menus, the signs, and of course the gates to the zones, I do think this hologram aesthetic is quite pleasing. But I believe the most valid critique that haters make for this game really are the flat building textures. The quality of the textures themselves aren't the problem, but the fact that most buildings are just cubes with textures on them is inexcusable. Containing this game to one city was their opportunity to polish the overworld, and they kinda blew it. They could have easily been more ambitious with the environment. I want you to know that I think this flaw is objective, and it's pretty much the only complaint that I share with the game's haters, at least in terms of initially affecting the gameplay. Where I diverge from these critiques is that it personally stopped affecting my playthrough once I started playing the game. I'm just not the type of person to let the texture of a wall inhibit my enjoyment of a piece of media that I'm clearly having fun with. That's basically the entire difference in philosophy that causes this rift among fans. I'm not the type of person to dislike something because it's not as good as it could be. It should be better, but why would I expect it to, considering the previous two Pokemon games' weakest points were their environments? If the building textures are a priority for you and constantly think about it throughout your playthrough, that sucks. I'm sorry. But for me, it's not a priority. So after an hour, it really didn't bother me at all. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like it affected the gameplay of ZA in any way. Sure, it highlights a fundamental problem with Game Freak, but in execution, it is such a superficial flaw that I easily ignored. But to complete my initial thoughts, upon entering Lumio City, we go from the most criticized aspect of the game to the most praised, the jazz. I'm incredibly biased. I have been a huge fan of Insane in the Rain music since before True Green 7 existed. Carlos has been on this channel multiple times, and he's such a cool person to hang out with in person. The fact that the artist I technically have listened to the most was brought on to compose a bunch of essential tracks in this game heavily affected some of my opinions. I will talk about the soundtrack as a whole in a dedicated stream or video, but I gotta say that when I was first met with the jazz arrangements of Lumio City and a great deal of the initial tracks in the beginning of the game that you hear throughout your journey, I was enthralled. What you need to know about my real life now is that I just moved closer to the center of a big city, and I'm on my own for the first time, so Lumios's theme and Hotel AZ's music felt like the soundtrack of my current life. It really resonated with me. But that's it for my initial first impressions of the way the game looked, felt, and sounded. Now let me actually describe my thoughts of the game from beginning to end. Gameplay-wise, this is my favorite Pokemon game. Obviously, if I skip mentioning anything, it didn't make a good or bad impression. We're introduced to the ZA Royales right from the beginning, along with a pretty cool cutscene. Many people harped on the lack of voice acting. It literally isn't a problem for me since I grew up with Pokemon not having voice acting, but I wouldn't mind voice acting. It's a valid complaint and would be a welcomed addition, especially as an animator and fan of voice acting in general. But it very much wasn't a thing I registered during this cutscene. Instead, I was flabbergasted by how they instantly made Floette look incredibly badass. It was a fantastic character reintroduction, because it instantly made me love a character more than I already did. But let's talk about the battle mechanics introduced right at the start and the ZA Royale as a whole, since we get a glimpse of it early on. This game introduces real-time combat. I'm a huge fan of turn-based Pokemon. It can get pretty bland when it's easy, but I think the solution is for Game Freak to simply make battles more engaging with items, actual strategies, and bosses with diverse teams, instead of completely doing away with the turn-based combat in the main series Pokemon. But I gotta admit, this was a completely successful experiment with real-time Pokemon combat. Especially because even when a battle was easy, it was engaging and felt like I was commanding a Pokemon in the way I've always imagined doing so, like in the anime. It's not perfect, and it took some time to get the hang of it, like by now I fully understand the rules of turn-based Pokemon, but here it felt like I was relearning Pokemon, especially since I don't play other RPGs. But it's fun slowly getting better at using a mechanic instead of already being a veteran like in any other Pokemon game I've played in the last 20 years. I don't know how I felt about slower Pokemon taking longer to charge up moves, or at least that's what it felt like. Sometimes I don't lock on perfectly and my Pokemon don't move when I want them to, or they take some time to move after switched in. But the point is, I don't fully understand the system yet, and that may not be a flaw with the actual game, I just don't know why some things happen the way they do sometimes in battle. In practice though, this is the first Pokemon game I have simply never been bored during any battle. It's so active and engaging that I don't have time to be bored. It's a major factor in why this game was so fun to me. The lack of abilities was disappointing, but it's not like I noticed any real difference. What I did end up liking, way more than I thought I would, was the addition of plus moves, so that even non-Mega Pokemon could utilize powered up attacks. No complaints there. Anything that allows people to play with the Pokemon they want to use is a plus. But the biggest surprise of my entire experience was how much I loved the ZA Royales. I very much enjoyed Legends Arceus, but my least favorite aspect was the lack of trainer battles. They slightly overcorrected by giving us a game with way less exploration than the average, but definitely implemented the exact kind of battles I wanted to have in a Legends game. I honestly thought I wouldn't appreciate the ZA Royales because of all the gimmicks they added, but I can say for certain that these additions, like the bonus cards that give you tasks to fulfill during these Royales, and the ability to sneak up on opponents, makes Legends ZA my absolute favorite Pokemon battling experience. They are incredibly fun for me. It's so satisfying to rack up enough points before the night ends and get a promotion match ticket. I'm still doing them in the postgame, and they are the most engaging way to grind, and the rewards are gratifying. But let's go through some of the plot and characters in the order that they appear. AZ is one of the most interesting characters in the franchise. His inclusion is a fantastic way to continue and complete the unfinished story of X and Y, and we'll talk about him more as I describe my thoughts of the finale. The interior of Hotel AZ is so cozy. In fact, pretty much every interior in the game is great when they exist. If there were more, I would give this game points for the interiors, but we know I can't considering there are barely any. It was cool getting to see Laventon's abandoned apartment though. That's a really neat Easter egg. The rivals in these games are in the top half of rivals, not because they are necessarily amazing, but mostly because they aren't annoying. They have some of the best designs, I would say, and if their arcs were far more grand, they would be on the top of my list. Lita is cute, Naveen is interesting, and Tani or Urbane are very cool, but they didn't really wow me with how they were incorporated into the plot. Not disappointed, just not impressed. I like them though. I think most of the complaints people have with Tani or Urbane was due to the hand-holding in the beginning, and I gotta say, while some were exaggerating the extent of the tutorial's hand-holding, it was definitely too long. Like, it was the most enjoyable Pokemon tutorial in terms of what I was given to do, but more than 2 hours of tutorial is pushing it. Like, I don't agree with those complaining that you can't access the full world during the literal tutorial, but I get wanting to explore when the tutorial has gone on for hours. Mabel is a breath of fresh air. I'm tired of Pokemon characters talking to you like a child, but this woman says what's on her mind. Usually Pokemon characters are one note in how they treat you. Either they praise you like you're the best person ever, or show their absolute hatred towards you. While considering she's a reformed villain, her dialogue is more balanced, with a range of subtle praise to spicy commentary that is nearly adversarial. Her design update is perfect, her literal quirks are cute, but most importantly, her quests and TM rewards are worthwhile. She made catching Pokemon so much fun. Finding every Pokemon in each zone during the day, in between my ZA Royales at night, is a pretty addicting gameplay loop. But AZ and Mabel aren't the only returning characters. Emma is back, and she's, better than ever. I kinda wish there were way more returning characters. Considering this game is basically a sequel, you'd assume other characters would show up instead of getting mentioned by a random NPC. But Emma will definitely suffice. Her side quests signaled the end of the tutorial, so I only associate her with good vibes. These missions range from tedious to interesting, like you'd expect, so I wouldn't say they're the reason I play the game, but some of the best missions are memorable for hardcore fans, like the museum, which felt like a love letter to lore keepers. But now that the world is fully open at this point of the game, it's time to talk about exploration. I'd say this aspect of ZA is divisive. The individual biomes of Legends Arceus, while diverse, are fairly empty, so I was welcoming a city-based Pokemon game. But again, ZA doesn't do it perfectly either, despite, I think, being as fun in a different way. You have many people judging the wild zones superficially. Yeah, they are not diverse enough in terms of environment, but they function exactly like routes with an underrated verticality. I love how you slowly get access to 20 wild zones, half of which have multiple different sections like a Pokemon route. For example, Wild Zone 5 has the streets, the park area, the rooftops, then the square with an alpha and sewers. Even Wild Zone 1 is underrated. It seems like just a straight path, but then as you unlock Rock Smash or any smashing move, it naturally teaches you about the various ways to explore this city, like climbing up to the roofs and finding Pokemon that are less straightforward to catch, like Pichu. Again, this is simply how I ended up experiencing the wild zones. I had fun catching Pokemon just like in Legends ZA, and I love how the Pokeball guy returns the ones you wasted. One final aspect that made for such an enjoyable catching and battling experience was the dynamic music, and something I believe is undoubtedly important, the sound effects. They are so satisfying. I think the audio of this game, both in the soundtrack and various sounds, are doing a lot of heavy lifting. They are key in crafting such an addicting gameplay loop. I've seen those who are heavily critical of this game still acknowledge how successful these aspects of the game are, but I think something Game Freak also is finally stepping in the right direction is the ability to interact with environmental roadblocks through your own Pokemon's moves. Ride Pokemon were a fantastic replacement for HMs and Arceus, and I definitely think we needed a small assortment of our own Pokemon to ride in order to quickly get around town like in Let's Go, if they weren't going to give us the rollerblades like in X and Y. But after generations, we can actually use regular moves to crush boulders, create bridges, wash away gunk, and mow down roots. There could have totally been more of these obstacles, they only scratched the surface, but I am confident in saying that these additions made for the most immersive Pokemon training experience. Direct real-time moves in the overworld allowed me to bond with my team like never before, and that's why I play Pokemon, to roleplay as a trainer, and your Pokemon are utilized in this game better than any. And the fact that taking down obstacle and crushing Mega Shards gives you experience, it stimulates the brain. It never felt more rewarding to command a Pokemon. Climbing scaffolding to get screws in exchange for canary plushes made total sense to me. Exploring the rooftops felt fresh for a Pokemon game. It's not perfect, but I was constantly dropping from buildings and running into squares and corners I've never been to. There was one point in the game where I could finally explore, battle trainers, and catch Pokemon where I exclaimed that there was a lot of fun things for me to finally do. I had a blast leveling up my Pokemon in all of the various ways I could. There were also way more NPCs than I thought Pokemon would ever have, and while most of them say rather inconsequential stuff, every 10th person I spoke to said something unhinged or interesting, but in general I do think the NPC dialogue was a bit boring. It was a quantity over quality issue, I guess. Overall, I enjoyed running around, especially now that the performance is great. I can see why it could get boring for someone who doesn't really care about bonding with their team, battling trainers, and catching Pokemon, but at that point I don't know why you're playing a Pokemon game. I feel like customization is the real test. This game has, without a doubt, the best assortment of clothes and styles of any Pokemon game. This kind of stuff is far from a priority for me, and never makes or breaks my Pokemon experience, but seeing a random niche Pokemon tastefully incorporated into the fashion or even the environment the way real-world animals are displayed on buildings and posters is what I think makes the Pokemon world feel real, not whether or not the buildings are fully modeled. Of course they should be, but it doesn't affect my experience. However, seeing a Solrock on a sweater does. It's just a reality, not because I like customization, but because I play for the Pokemon themselves. I love Pocket Monsters. Seeing them in cute ways, like on the bridges and manholes, brings me joy. If you don't understand why and think that I should heighten my standards for what makes me happy, I'd very much disagree. I should expect more, but I shouldn't have less fun. We have different priorities. Criticism can coexist with enjoyment, and if I have to not enjoy something in order for you to have fun, that is your issue. I'm having a blast. I got exactly what I paid for, and it's totally valid if you did not. I can understand why, because unlike some people, I understand that other people have different priorities. But let's get back to the main story. Something you have to understand about my playstyle over the last 2 generations is that in order to counteract the EXP share and to fully capitalize on the opportunity to easily integrate new Pokemon into your party with the wireless box system, I actually played with a team of 12 Pokemon. I like playing this way because I get to bond with more Pokemon and I will never be over-leveled. I prefer being challenged, but that also means that I didn't breeze through the game, because I was constantly underleveled, so I lost to Vinny's Mega Drampa. I also play with the Pokemon I want to, so I didn't have a Fairy, Dragon, or Ice type at the time, so whenever I mention that I lost to an NPC, that's because I'm usually anywhere from 5 to 10 levels under them, and I like that. I'm not complaining about the loss. I like Vinny, by the way. Love the trope of a gentle giant. And while we're on the topic, so many people were acting cheeky whenever they saw Jet or Vinny in trailers or early on in the game, expecting them to be twist villains and acting like they were smart for predicting their heel turn. But in reality, it was obvious to me that they weren't the villains. That was just a pet peeve I had about how various creators saw them. Ultimately, when you beat Vinny, there is this controversial jump in the rank from V to F. Some people were angry about it, and because they were looking forward to the grind and were acting acting as if the game took away an aspect of the game from them, when in reality that's just an illusion. I actually had even more fun after the jump in ranks because the Royale became slightly more difficult and interesting, so it was a positive for me. But this is also when the game introduces sequential story arcs for each rank, as you battle these strong, famous trainers in Lumiose. That's when the game really starts. So what is my opinion of each trainer in Lumiose and their arc? Here was my experience. When Canary was introduced, I thought, wow, I like this design more than Iono, and I love Iono. But then when it's revealed that Tarragon was her grandfather and supported her through her career this entire time, I fell in love with this plot point. I love their dynamic. We've never seen anything like that in Pokemon, and I think I loved it even more because I was originally thinking that her plotline was going to be straightforward and that Tarragon was just an obsessed fan, so the surprise was genius. I love how they set up this pattern or theme of every top-ranking trainer having a second in command that contrasts them both in personality and type. I think that was my favorite aspect of the story. Ivor and Gwyn were my least favorite of the duos, mostly because I thought Ivor was the most one-dimensional. Not bad, but nothing impressive. Gwyn, however, was entertaining and allowed for one of my favorite locations in the game. Many players, including me, expected a whole tunnel system or Lumiose catacombs that would be part of the game, so I was disappointed when it was revealed that there was no Lumiose underground, but the sewers did scratch that itch a bit. Corbeau and Philippe were amazing. I've always loved the trope of a criminal with a heart of gold, or at least a ruffian with a code, and these two looked cool doing it. Some of the best anti-heroes in the franchise. His Gyarados gave me trouble with all of its bouncing too. Of course, Jason and Le Bon were incredibly memorable and hilarious. A fairy specialist that acts exactly how a fae would, and then their former punk dragon-taming attendant is such a treat. To me, Le Bon was the most memorable character in the game, but that may be because I lost to her twice and had to redo 15 minutes of cutscenes and battles, or because I think she's hot. Could be both. It was honestly during hers and Jason's fights that I noticed a bittersweet aspect of the game. Because of how hectic and fast-paced these battles are, I barely get to digest the new megas they utilize, or the amazing battle music, like Jason's. Like in the previous game's turn-based battles, I can gawk at designs or bop to the theme as long as I want. I mean, it's pretty great how each boss has their own individual battle theme, but I barely got to hear them in the game, especially with all the sound effects. Not a real problem though. The final duo, however, was probably my actual favorite, because they tied back to X and Y and helped elevate the plot into the eventual climax. Griselle and Grisham are fire. Not gonna lie, Griselle is also underratedly super pretty, but that doesn't matter right now. What I love is how the game becomes even more of an X and Y sequel once they are revealed to be X-Team Flare members. It was obvious, but it was a surprise when they became super relevant to the plot. Honestly, I think all of their serious and comedic moments landed. Like Mabel, I love their slightly antagonistic tone instead of being full-fledged villains. It was during the battle with Grisham's super cool team and perfect remix of Team Flare Grunt battle theme that I realized how much I was disappointed with the little amount of music from X and Y that was utilized. Like sometimes they would just use the theme straight from the original games, like the Boutique theme and Hotel Richisme. Which makes sense since if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but come on, give a dog a bone. But I am extremely thankful for this arc in the plot because it gave us my favorite section, which was Lysander Lab. Not only did it reveal the true nature of the plot, revealing that AZ created Lumiose Tower 2,000 years ago as an effort to repent for his sins, but I personally felt like Lysander and his lab were the most fully realized part of the game. This may just be a personal thing, but when I was exploring the lab, I felt like I was getting a glimpse at the game that we've all wanted since we were young. The atmospheric lighting, the set dressing, the wild Pokemon that you could battle with modern mechanics, the alphas, the small puzzles, and tons of lore, all wrapped up in way more realistic versions of a location that we explored back in Pokemon's top-down era 12 years ago, made this feel like an actual sequel and remake. If you showed a Pokemon fan a screenshot of this location back in 2015, they would go wild because it looks exactly like the mock-ups we got in the past of what an open-world Pokemon game would look like. It's not the best dungeon in Pokemon mechanically, the puzzles are rudimentary, but in terms of what I think a Pokemon game should feel like, it was the most fully realized. Again, I know that Game Freak should be expected to do much better, but my point is that if the entire game was as polished as Lysander Lab, it would be far less controversial. Now before moving on to the climax, let me finally talk about the Rogue Mega Battles. I enjoyed these way more than G-Max Raid battles, Terra Raid battles, and perhaps more than the Noble Pokemon in Arceus. Each Rogue Mega was incredibly intimidating, and I love how they all had different methods of attack, so the strategy isn't simple simply type advantage. Again, it really was the closest I felt to my individual Pokemon as I fought alongside them against these rogue megas. This may be the non-gamer in me speaking, but it's not like I was easily able to discern the strategies I should employ for each mega, so I couldn't turn off my brain while doing these. I had to dodge for my life and constantly restore my Pokemon's health, which honestly brings me to how awesome it is that there is a cooldown for using items, which makes so much sense when these things aren't turn-based anymore. It was fun timing my healing correctly. And as for the mega designs themselves, I'll have a separate video addressing that, but in general, they were all over the place. There was no mega I absolutely hated though, because honestly, the ones that angered the internet the most, like Mega Starmie, I thought were super entertaining in context, so I had positive opinions of them. Not necessarily design-wise, but just as a Pokemon, because at the end of the day, if the Pokemon entertains me in some way, then I like it, even if its design is lazy. So megas like that weren't my least favorite. It was mostly the ones with okay ideas, but not the best executions. But regardless of the designs, the way they are introduced through rogue mega battles and even boss battles was very entertaining, and helped show them in a proper light. That's why I disagree with those who complain about Pokemon designs after first seeing them in leaked images. It's not the way the artist intended for them to debut, outside of the actual context. But now let's finally talk about the game's climax, another divisive aspect, perhaps with different reasons for each person. Okay, so I think an aspect of my experience with the climax that many others didn't deal with was the fact that I lost to Tawny when we competed to see who was the strongest Mega Evolution user. Again, I was simply underleveled and didn't come with my best 6 out of 12 Pokemon I trained. Now I thought that wouldn't be a problem because I could just restart, but because of the game's autosave, this wasn't possible, and this just so happened to be the one battle that you aren't allowed to rematch. This is incredibly bittersweet because on one hand, throughout the entire finale, I felt like I kinda didn't experience this ultimate win against this game's rival. It felt like for once I would end the game without being the best trainer in the region. It was a weird feeling, and it felt like I didn't earn the classic hero title. But on the other hand, this made Tawny's decision to be the one to partner with Floette make way more sense than if she lost. So it actually felt like a scripted loss, since your rival would end up in the same position no matter the battle's outcome. So while it made me sad that I lost the battle and couldn't correct my mistakes, it made the plot feel slightly better. And after that loss, I had to redo a bunch of dialogue when I lost to a few of the rogue megas. This is not a complaint in regards to the challenge, I liked that. It's more a complaint about how I have to redo a bunch of dialogue in order to progress. But yeah, those rogue megas are tough. One of the best aspects of the finale was every boss and their underlings helping us take down Ange Floette. It was a very well done finale plot-wise. Loved the human ladder and Corbeau's badass trust fall. He's a fantastic character, but my feelings on the actual battle against Ange Floette was mixed. The fact that we were basically fighting 2 sentient flowers was a bit underwhelming. They simply weren't the most creative in execution or gameplay, but because I am not experienced when it comes to video game battles, it took some time for me to understand the patterns and strategy. But once I did, I actually enjoyed outsmarting the flowers. This is the inverse of what others experienced, where once they quickly understood the flowers' patterns, they had a pretty boring time instead. But there were a few things that totally made up for those awkward aspects and facilitated a very memorable finale. I loved Zygarde shielding us and us controlling it in order to attack. It was so cinematic and made us instantly bond with Zygarde. In fact, commanding my Pokemon to hide behind the wall, attacking when the moment is opportune, withdrawing them when necessary, and calling them back under Zygarde when we needed to be shielded from attack was genuinely the closest I've ever felt to my Pokemon ever. And when we finally defeated Ange Floette with a Nihil Light, the fireworks display following the explosion was visually my favorite shot in the game. It was a very well-handled climax thematically, even if the gameplay wasn't perfect. At the end of the day, I was insanely glad how this game allowed for Zygarde to finally showcase what we've been waiting to see for 12 years. It's a great redemption for the legendary that was probably done the most dirty by Game Freak. It took me 34 hours to get to the credits. That's usually the sweet spot when it comes to beating a Pokemon game. For example, Black and White 2 takes around the same time, and that spans an entire region. Sword and Shield took me closer to 24 hours, over the span of a week of course. So again, I don't think the size of the map really has anything to do with how long it would take to finish a Pokemon game. I didn't even come close to 100%ing Legends EA. I even went at a slightly faster pace than I would have gone if I wasn't a PokeTuber reviewing the game. So I'm satisfied, but the icing on the cake really was the, spoiler alert, surprising death of AZ after the credits. That was wild. Unless I'm mistaken, it's the first major Pokemon character to begin the game alive and die by the end. It was super fitting and made total sense, and I actually think AZ may be in the top 3 most important characters in all of Pokemon, the dude is responsible for so much, and allowing us to pick our last words to him by his grave was incredibly sweet. We basically said goodbye to a character who stayed relevant for 4 generations, and then Lysander basically becoming AZ, wandering the region, correcting his mistakes, turning one of the worst written villains and least sympathetic antagonists in the franchise into a super interesting character was actually impressive. This is why I would only recommend this game to those who have played X and Y. There are multiple characters and plot points that are simply way more enjoyable if you've played those games. The postgame ain't bad. I'm very much loving the Infinite ZA Royale. The Xerneas and Yveltal encounters are pretty anticlimactic. The Lysander battle was beautiful though. I gotta say, out of all the things that I prioritize in a Pokemon game, this had way more positives than negatives in any recent Pokemon game. All of the negative aspects were simply things that would never impede my experience of bonding with Pokemon as I battle and explore with them. I was watching a bunch of video game reviewers on YouTube so I can understand the grievances of non-Pokemon fans, and while all of their complaints are valid, there was one that kinda ticked me off and made me realize the complete difference in what people get out of this game. One reviewer was complaining about the game's appearance, which isn't anything odd, but then they got angry about how Game Freak had the gall to include a camera feature when the game looks this bad. That was a ridiculous critique. This thought simply showcases the disconnect between those who play Pokemon because it's one of the many video games that they play, and those who play because they love the Pokemon themselves. Because if you go online, so many people are having fun taking pictures of their customized trainer alongside their Pokemon, all with artistic angles and setups and filters. They actually look really good, and people are having a blast utilizing this feature that offended another video game reviewer because they perhaps don't understand the appeal of Pokemon and only play it because they have to. I don't know. In reality, it's probably because they play for different reasons, but I still think they should still understand how people would enjoy the camera feature. And of course, Game Freak should do a way better job in the future incorporating everything that can appeal to all the different types of Pokemon fans. Those who play for the gameplay and those who play for the graphics. I don't know who plays Pokemon for graphics, but obviously every game that is full price should at least be polished, like Pokemon games used to be. Does every game have to be perfect for it to be played? No, and some people are setting their expectations too high for a company that they are constantly disappointed by, which is absurd, even if Pokemon is the highest grossing media franchise. If you didn't like the previous Pokemon games, why do you think this one would be like 30 times better? At the end of the day, they don't put the time and budget into Pokemon games that are necessary, because most of the money comes from merch, and frankly, Game Freak has stated multiple times that they prefer the culture of smaller teams, and don't want to run into the problems that AAA titles seem to end up with. But again, that isn't a good excuse considering they still run into problems regardless. At the end of the day, I personally think all the major complaints and praises of this game are technically correct, but the vitriol is what I disagree with. Pokémon Legends EA is the best Pokemon game in the worst package. It's like getting the gift you wanted, but months after your birthday, unwrapped and a bit dented. Sure, the value is still there, yet it could have easily been presented way more majestically. And at the end of the day, this was my favorite Pokemon game in terms of the gameplay loop. But since I'm a huge fan of journeying through the entire region with new Pokemon and different biomes, this isn't my absolute favorite Pokemon game. If an entirely new generation with new Pokemon and locations had the gameplay of Legends EA, it would be my favorite Pokemon game of all time. For now, this game is probably in my top 5 Pokemon games. I loved it. And if you don't hate this video, leave a like and check out all the other Pokemon related videos I made. Check the description for all my socials where I give sneak peeks of my videos and opinions. Consider clicking the join button or become a member on Patreon to receive rewards like seeing my videos days early, and it also helps support the creation of videos like this that usually don't really do well. But I appreciate you watching regardless. Bye!